Thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. This is a stamp-along featuring a half-page scene. Half-page is going to be a little bit longer, take a little bit more time, but it's not a complicated composition. For the most part, this composition is built out of the cabin here, the Sedge filler stamp down below to kind of create this hilly kind of meadowy area, and then we just used the tree cluster images. If you don't have either one of these, you can substitute another tree. If you just have one or the other, you can certainly use one or the other, and then just use portions of it, like I'll show you in the video of how to kind of expand the usage of, these types of images for, to create smaller, more distant trees in the background. But the sky right here is using the cloud with sun. Filled in, again, like a filler stamp is used down below in terms of grass, the filler stamp above, a good choice for that one is the cloud cumulus right here. But this lesson right here is the same concept as the previous lesson, but I just put it on to a half-page elongated format right here to really emphasize the diagonal lighting scheme featuring the light source and the reflected light down below. I really like this kind of elongated kind of a dynamic going on between those two. You can do it in a quarter-page scene like this, but it's just so short. But this one right here, we have several inches in between those two points of light. In terms, again, light source and the reflected light down here. So it's just kind of fun to kind of play around and push and really emphasize the things that you're trying to create in terms of, that kind of visual dynamic within a piece. So anyways, here's the things that you'll need, okay? You can substitute all kinds of different things, it's just more about the concept. But have a range of some blues, kind of a light, medium, and dark blue of some sort. We have our green color scheme down here. Play around, mix and match if you want again too, between brands, values and whatnot. Peeled paint, here's a Marvy darker green, whatnot. You can use whatever you want in, this area down here. But I would try to have a nice range of tones because it's just, you can build them up. And some browns, some light tans and whatnot. Into your darker ones. This one uses a lot of like desert sand and walnut stain right here. Okay, now that being said, try to kind of focus in on more of the concept too. If you have matte paper, okay, and you're doing this and you want to use colored pencils, chalks, pastels, whatever, or if you want to apply tone using, a cosmetic sponge on who knows, matte paper, watercolor paper, anything like that, okay? It's more about creating kind of that dynamic right there, and your use of kind of selective coloring within this given space to create those lighting references in here, meaning we just don't color everything up uniformly. We kind of use our darker tones for the shadow areas and to kind of create a little bit of a vignette around the edges right here, but retain some of those areas of light within your given spaces, okay? But for the most part, really emphasize your light source, whatever it might be, and your reflected light down there, and it really creates that kind of diagonal lighting and reflected light dynamic within a given space. And overall, for the composition, they're really fun to do that way. It kind of breaks up that area, and it kind of creates these little triangles throughout a composition. Sometimes they say are kind of good compositional elements for to create a kind of a visual harmony within a given space. So anyways, I hope you decide to join in, or if you just want to watch this video, I hope you enjoy it, and thanks as always for tuning into the channel. Okay, I had a lot of fun doing that dynamic lighting assignment on the previous video, so I thought we would do it again. But what we'll do is we'll start with a half-page piece of paper here, okay? And this one's glossy cardstock, but you could be doing this assignment or this project on a piece of matte paper. You can be using whatever type of media you want. If you like pastels, chalks, Copic markers, whatever you want, okay? This one, but the concept of this one is to really kind of push this idea of this kind of diagonal format as far as our light source and our reflected light here, okay? This one we're going to do more of like a, I don't know, kind of a noon to 2 p.m. type of thing, but we'll really kind of push the emphasis between those 2 points within our composition right here. So anyways, this is why we're doing it on a half-page piece of paper this time, so we can really kind of showcase that that angle between those 2 points within our scene. Okay, so I'm going to go with a cabin right here, all right? And this cabin's going to be over here, and it'll be illuminated, but I'll, for the most part, leave the illumination kind of in front of the cabin for our subject matter. Our little hikers coming back after kind of a you know, a day in the woods or mountains or wherever they hike to. Okay, but let's go with a little bit more color on this one, okay? But let's not take too much time to color these. So what I do is I bring in my black over the entire scene, and then let's see if I can get a little bit of variation within those trees there, okay? So this one's a olive brown, so any kind of dark green that you might have kind of just go into that tree, the foliage area, okay? And if I get kind of a variation in tone, great. If not, then so be it. I'll be bringing in some additional colors into the scene anyway. Okay, let me see. How far should I go up? I'll go about... I'm going to center this one because I do want to add in some additional sky elements in the form of some textured cloud. Okay. All right. So, anyways, this is what I'm talking about. We're just going for a little bit of variation within those. You know, those branches and leaves right up there, so hopefully you can see a little bit of that green in there. So that's instead of just stamping it out in black and kind of coloring it, you know, because these aren't outline designs, I color directly onto the stamp and just stamp it out like that. And we'll do that same type of technique with the rest of our tree imagery, okay? All right, so... This is the, that was the cabin, by the way, the 140E is an Edward, and this is the tree cluster stamp. I have 2 of them, one's tree cluster and one's tree cluster small. You can use one or the other, or just use some other form of tree to fill in this area here. So I'm just going with the black, and then I'm kind of scumbling this green into it. This green of mine is a little bit dry. Let me go back to that olive green. Olive brown, actually. What a great color. This one's the number 27 Marvy. Okay, and why don't we go with some right here in the foreground. We have 2 different sizes, so why don't we go with a couple different sizes here, okay? But if you have one size or a different tree, go ahead and use that. Okay, so black, re-ink in between your impressions so that you get a nice crisp impression with your, you know, every time that you ink this up. If you go for a kind of a ghost impression, you can do that to kind of reinforce or push visual depth within a scene, but I'm going to be using a smaller one too, so if I was going to do that with anything, I would do it with the smaller one, because it's, you know, it's smaller. It could just be a smaller tree cluster or something like that, but as far as a reference goes, I believe it kind of represents something a little bit farther off in the distance, but it's not that far, so I think I'll still go with a pretty solid impression of it by re-inking each time. You could take the time and do, you know, brown tree trunks and something like that if you want to, but I'm not going to bother with that. Okay, so I want the sun in here, and let's see. That being said, I don't want to change you know, I don't want to cover up too much of that area in there. Okay, so repetition of form, huh? With scenic stamping, it's one of the best applications of stamps is scenic stamping, because we can have so much of the same image used over and over. Okay, that's the whole image right there. Let's go for some partial images. Okay, some partial impressions using this stamp. So just grab a paper towel, tear it to give you that kind of more jagged edge like that, and then we'll mask off like so, and go for some partial impressions to represent, you know, maybe some smaller trees in the distance, or maybe they can be over like a little slope or something like that. Another great kind of application of rubber stamps in the form of scenic stamping, because not only can you use stamps in repetition, but you can use partial impressions as well to give you some really different looks. You know, half of a tree, the top of a tree makes for a smaller tree in the distance, and you have all that repetition in there. So one stamp, in other words, can take you quite a long way, as you can see right here. I use two different sizes, but you, like I said, you could use one. Okay. All right, so we have this little grove of trees in here now, right? Okay. One of the things about scenic stamping is the use of filler stamps. We have all these different images like this. Sometimes we're using larger images and they have more information on them, like the meadow with my rocks and trees and kind of foreground area in it. But sometimes you're using kind of individual images like this. So one of the things, I was going to use this one right here. This is the pond right here, right? You color that blue or something like that and it becomes water. If I do this with grass and, you know, the surrounding area around it brown, then that is, you know, becomes just dirt. And that's what I want in this case. So I'm just going to use about half of this. I'm not doing this kind of this area and up, okay? I want that area to, you know, go to for my cabin to be in, okay? All right, so go about like this. Okay, so we've stamped it down like so, right? So it's a little worn out here because this is where people are walking all the time. But here's all this space in here, right? And what do you do for that? You can just add color, but texture is kind of a really nice thing to add into a composition, be it whatever type of genre you're working in. The play with textural forms kind of completes kind of the visual language within a given composition. And we'll be adding some more, you know, with the use of color and whatnot, but just in terms of, you know, the scenic stamping aspect, I just stamped it right over my trees, okay? So I've made it light enough where you can just stamp it right over things and it doesn't really show, but in this open area you can certainly see those grassy forms and tufts within that given space. Alright, so that is that. I'm going to do my foreground later, okay? These things are kind of drying as I'm, you know, stamping and speaking here. Alright, so if I was going to do kind of more of a sunset type of scene, I would stamp out this cloud with sun in a color from that color scheme. But usually when you're doing something and it represents kind of more high noon or something like that, you know, you're just going to go with a color like a blue, okay? Like at high noon, when you look at the sun, it's not all yellow and, you know, orange and whatever. That's sunset, sunrise, you know, it's on a different kind of area on your horizon. But when you're looking at directly overhead, a lot of people associate the sun with warmth, so they assume that when you stamp out a sun, it should always be a little bit yellow, and that's fine. You could make it look that way, but it isn't necessarily the color. All right, like I said, high, between, I don't know, 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. to 5 or something. It depends on where you live, of course. That sun is kind of more just this blinding white light. So, that being said, that's what I'm going for in this scene. I just stamped it in a blue, kind of more of a medium blue, whatever kind of blue you have would be good. All right. Now we have this cloud here, okay? This is the cloud Cumulus. The top of it is top lit, okay? What if I stamp it out here on the side? The sun is going to be here, so I'm going to have this lit to the left side of it, meaning I just have to kind of rotate it like that, and it becomes side lit, all right? If it was over the top of it, I don't have room on this one, but if it was over the top of it, it would be bottom lit, so I'm using it this way, okay? All right, let's just get some of these stamped out. I've been doing kind of a wiping off of the perimeter, just to give it a little bit more of a kind of a graceful merge into our previous impression. So, a good nice half-inch or so into the cloud or so, an inch, I don't know, you go as much as you want, okay? If I stamp it right on and over those trees, I don't need to worry about it. I don't want to go too low like this because it will stamp out in my cabin, and in this case I don't want that. If I was doing like a nighttime scene with a moon and it's, the colors are kind of more of that bluish tinge and some of this blue got into my cabin, no big deal. But on this one right here, I'm not going to do that. Alright, so you can see where that lighting is coming from, that direction. And what are we talking about on this scene here? But kind of an emphasis on the lighting within the scene. So all those little things kind of add up to an overall kind of lighting statement in terms of lighting direction. Time of day, brightness of light, whatever. Okay, so we have our composition laid out here. The sky is going to be blue. Grassy area down here is going to be green. One of the common kind of base tones between all of this, it's blue up here. But blue also plays a part in green, right? You add yellow to blue, and it becomes green. So, that being said, when I start applying some color onto my scene, let's do something here. Let's go with some of my Tumbled Glass. A lot of you guys don't have Marvy inks unless you're a kind of long-time, or reasonably long-time stamper like I am. But what I'll do is I'll go with this Tumbled Glass re-inker. A Memento Summer Sky would be fantastic for that. If you have the pad or whatever, you can do that. Or let's go with a little bit of the Summer Sky right here. Okay, a couple drops maybe, and let's go for some Tumbled Glass. Why don't we just do them both right here? Okay. The Summer Sky is a little bit lighter in value, so I will start with that one. I don't know, maybe I need it a little bit more. Or if you have the pad form of it, that's fine. Okay, so we want to bring emphasis to our light source. Light here, light down here, okay? Actually, that is quite a bit of tone here. So just kind of add it around. If you're doing like pastels or chalks or something like that, just be careful not to tone out all of your sun, okay? All right, now here's what I'm doing. I'm oscillating light and dark. The lighter area of this cloud is right up here. The darker area is within this space. You can see the darker areas right here, 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 and here. All I'm doing is I'm going in there and just kind of enhancing that or pushing that lighting scheme, that illumination, rather, further, okay? With the use of some additional tone in those darker areas, okay? Let's use a little bit more of that. Let's go back to that Summer Sky. Now I'm just using reinker fluid. I think it's easy and it really blends out, spreads really nicely. I didn't always do that. You know, if I had the pad form, I'm using that. But I bought some reinkers recently, and it just, you know, you get a lot of coverage from that because you really get a lot of that ink in your tip like this. Okay, now putting this down in the meadow, kind of be careful about not toning everything out, just as I didn't tone everything out in my sky, okay? You still see some lighter areas within those clouds formations. Maybe what I'll do over here is I'll make these clouds over here a little bit darker by putting some of this lightest of blue into them, okay? Because on this one, I really want to emphasize that light source and the reflected light down here, kind of in that corner. I don't want these clouds to be, you know, overly bright or light. So I'll tone those out a little bit, okay? But what I was saying is when you start bringing in some of this blue into your meadow, if you're doing it with this, if you're doing pastels, it's a different story, okay? But I'm using more summer sky than I thought. Well, maybe more than a few little drops then. It's not too many though. It's probably more like, I don't know, 6 drops of it or something like that. And this is a pretty big piece of paper. Okay, so going back to what I was talking about, just try to make sure that you don't just tone everything out uniformly. It's not so important with this first color because it is fairly light, and if I tone everything out on accident and don't leave any of the white of the paper, you can still bring a lot of contrast into that area with the use of your medium and darker tones that you'll be using, or that we'll be using. Okay, so this is what it kind of looks like right here. Easy enough. You see some kind of oscillation between lights and darks within the space, and where, you know, you leave it. Just in general, I kind of start off by putting some underneath my trees, like it's, you know, these trees are casting a shadow. All right, but just in general, there's just, you know, this oscillation between white and dark and white and dark. It's not real dark, but it's darker than white, you know, this summer sky here. Okay, let me tone out some of these clouds a little bit more just to really emphasize, you know, kind of this spotlit area down here, okay? Okay, so that's it with that blue. Let's go on with some of this tumbled glass. Let's try that here. Okay, and roughly just kind of add it in the same place that you just did your previous color. Try not to, you know, really when you get to your darker colors, but even right now, try to retain the light areas that you didn't go over with your previous color, whatever that might be. And the shadows down here, deepening the shadows a little bit. In the end, it won't look so high noon, but it's for the purpose of emphasis. Okay, see down here, kind of adding it around underneath that tree, like so. All right, now that's blue down there. I will be bringing in some, you know, greens and whatnot into that area. Okay, this is kind of more of a medium tone blue. It's the number 10 blue. It's not real dark, and the color, the name of it is light blue, okay? But it's really more of a kind of a medium to me. It looks like a 35 to 40% blue or something, you know, in terms of darkness. Adding it around my sun here. Okay. Like I said, it's supposed to represent kind of a blue sky, but we don't work with light in, you know, without electronics or something like that, where you actually have physical light. What we're doing in our work is we're working with contrasts. So if I want that area to stand out lighter, then I have to make the area around it, make it darker, if I want it standing even lighter, then you have to take the area around it and make it one step darker. So that's what we're doing right here. Okay, now this is a dark blue. Okay, I can add it back here. A little bit farther away from the sun. Maybe I can put it a little bit in the sky here and there. Okay, you can add some under your trees if you want to. So let's start moving it into our warmer tones, okay, down in the grassy area. So let's grab a couple different greens here. This is a cottage ivy and bamboo leaves. Here's my distressing peeled paint. I think you get the idea. We're just grabbing some green tones in the same media, okay? It doesn't have to be the same brands, but they're all dye-based inks right here, okay? So I've just switched tips right here now. I'm going with a clean tip, you know, I don't have the blue on here anymore. So let's just try the peeled paint. I don't know which one's lighter than the other one, but generally I start with light and I work incrementally darker. Now, this is a time when I can also start going into some of my trees, you know, and adding a little bit more green to that. Try to retain some areas down in your grassy areas that are nice and light. Okay, just kind of scumbling around. It's almost like dry brushing in a way. You can use your like cosmetic makeup sponges that they're using a lot of these days, and stamped artwork. You can do, if this is on matte paper, you can do pastels or whatnot. Okay, so there's my peeled paint. Let's try some Memento bamboo leaves. Looks like a pretty good green. Alright, so kind of it's, I don't know, we're kind of getting rid of most of the blue grass visuals, you know, that previously existed, but they're just kind of merging in with this color scheme here, and the fact that we use blue in both sky and land will give the scene a little bit more continuity than if we just used only the greens in that grass and nowhere else. Okay, it looks a little bit fragmented sometimes, but you can kind of have a base layer of some other color that's happening somewhere else in your scene, and it'll bring, you know, that cohesion to the overall. It's just more harmony going on with similar tones, even if some of those tones are now buried. Okay, it's still part of the formula or recipe, you know, for other areas. All right, that one was the bamboo leaves. That one looks lighter than this cottage ivy, right? So that's why I started with the bamboo leaves. All right, cottage ivy. Kind of start adding it down in the shadow areas a little bit more, you know, to bring kind of an opacity to these objects. It kind of anchors them down, and by adding those shadows underneath them, it kind of, you know, kind of gives the impression that light is being cast from that sun up there. So shadows are a pretty good way to go, and I would recommend people kind of practice doing that. Now what I do is I just go with the darker color of a given color scheme that I'm working in. So in this one, it's greens down here, and the shadows would be darker green, okay? You can do them in black or something like that. A lot of people associate that, but it's really not happening visually. Okay. It's just usually a darker color of a given hue. So, for example, like this stamp pad right here, this color right here is not a different color than this top one. It's not black down here, it's just a darker version of, that, because it's, in this case it's the vertical edge, right? So, it's really easy to choose what color to do your shadow in. Just use a darker version of whatever's already laid down there. Alright, can you see that kind of coming together there? The kind of the light source and reflected light down here is becoming a little bit more apparent. The darker I go, there's more contrast. Alright, so we're not done yet here. Let's see, I need a new tool here. Let's go to our browns. I have this cabin right here that's, just stark white right now, so we need to bring in some color into it. Let's try some of the, here's a couple of different mementos. I have some distressings that would look good. Desert sand looks like a pretty light one though, doesn't it? So why don't we start off with that. One of the things I like to do on structures is I like to color the sides of them a certain value, okay? And what I'll do is on the rooftop right there, I'll leave the rooftop a little bit lighter because it's being top lit, right? Alright, so if this is supposed to be kind of dirt down here in front of the cabin, I can run in some of this desert sand in that area. Now be careful here, because if you want this to be nice and light, to be reflecting that light up there, just don't make that area too dark. But, okay, now the same thing goes for there's blues down in that grass, right? And I'm bringing some of this tan into my grassy area. Why not bring some of that tan into the grassy area as well? So we get the continuity between the browns and the greens now, as well as the greens and the blues, okay? So you have these overlapping base layer colors. I say base layer because they're kind of light. Alright, let's try a walnut stain distress ink right here. Alright. We can add in some of these shadows down here. Shadow areas. Okay, and on our cabin right here, why not bring some of this into the cabin? Like maybe on the side or on the front of it, where it's under that eave, maybe it can be a little bit darker, but see that? If you don't color in the whole thing uniformly, it can have more of a three-dimensional effect by your use of value, light and dark. Okay? So we don't color everything exactly the same. Same color family, brown, but different values of it. Okay. Let's bring some of this into this area down here and just I'm not going to color the whole thing, but I'll just put a few streaks of this brown across there like that. Okay, I'm putting some of this down in my grass as well. See, it kind of gives it a more kind of earthy look, right? Having that brown in the grass. And it gives it a little bit more continuity than just having all these, different color schemes everywhere within the scene. You have a little bit more harmony, or a lot more harmony, by bringing those colors into those other areas, okay? Alright. So that was the walnut. I can't even remember. I can't even remember if I used rich cocoa yet. Well, let's see if I did or not. I don't think I did. Okay, I'm being a little bit more kind of targeted with my usage of this. Going on the cabin. Going for a little bit of texture. Okay. Adding a little bit more shadow. The cabin stamp, there's a darker area underneath it, okay? Or at the base of it. See right down here? Where there's a little bit more shadow? And that's where I'm just going in and adding a little bit more shadow into it. You can see that front of that porch. It's darker than this side, right? And certainly darker than the roof, so I'm just emphasizing that darkness by putting some additional tone right over the top of it. Underneath my trees for shadows, okay, with the rich cocoa. It doesn't look like rich cocoa too much. It looks a little bit more like it when I kind of build it up like that. It's starting to get fairly saturated down there, so if I wipe it, it almost like wipes off ink, okay? So sometimes you have to kind of do more of a kind of a tapping motion so you can build up ink on the surface. Okay. My scene is looking a little bit more bottom heavy now because of all the different usage of tone down there, the layers of it. Okay, so I'm going back to my blue tip right here. All right, and what I'll do is I will add a little bit of a darker blue here and there up there, just to kind of match finishes. Okay. It's kind of matching the values by going a little bit darker up here too. It's kind of matching the values of the shadow areas down below. You don't have to put it everywhere, okay? In fact, I wouldn't. I'll just kind of add it here and there, just kind of, you know, bringing the sky a little bit closer to the land, the ground. Okay, a little bit, tone it right around there. I won't get too close to that sun. Okay, four corner type of thing. All right. Okay, let's go all the way to black. I stamped out a lot of my imagery in black, okay? Even if it was a little bit more of a kind of a multi-toned black up there in the form of those trees, okay? But I did use this black, so it's a good idea, in my opinion, to go all the way to black. In terms of the tones that you add into your scene, okay? Kind of in the form of, in this case, in the form of shadows. See that kind of, it brings it all together a little bit more by having kind of that same color that has been used to stamp out their imagery in. It stands to reason that that would also be used in the shading, because you're saying that that's, you know, the color that, you know, some of your darker areas would represent. All right, there we have that. Okay, you've seen me use this a lot in my scenes, but let's just go with some These are the tiny rocks small, okay? A little bit of texture down here. I'm just doing it in that walnut stain right up there, but I can add some out here in my grass as well. Okay, so let's take a look at it and see what that looks like right in here. See those kind of pebbly rocked surface right in here. See how that looks? It's just that extra little texture that's really fun. And let's go to black. So to do it in multiple values for additional depth and textural richness. Okay. All right. So there we have that. Source of light, reflected light, and then we have a source, you know, kind of reflection down here. In my previous video, what I did was I kind of subdued that a little bit, so I'm blotting off some of my green in here, and I'm just going to mute that a little bit so it's not quite so light there. Now see, I've kind of darkened up that area, and it brings more emphasis to that, you know, and that dynamic right there. I don't want this all dark over there. You know, I could, but I think it's still better to have a little bit of a value range over there. Okay. And that little tiny rocks in there creates kind of a nice textural change, you know, from what's happening within there. And plus it's a crisp little element within this otherwise kind of softer area, okay? But one of the things I like to do too, okay, this is the leafless limbs. I like adding some element of, you know, something sharp and crisp within a given space. So let's go with this leafless limbs, the small version. I guess if you had a larger one, you can have it here in the foreground. Okay, let's do another one somewhere within here. We'll do it a little bit shorter for variation. Stands to reason that there'd be some kind of dead trees within a given, you know, forested area. We'll go with 3. Okay. So those crisp little elements within those given spaces. Okay. This one right here, let me add a couple of little dark rocks around that tree. It kind of anchors it in there a little bit more. Okay, so let's add a couple more elements in here. Let's go with a versifying black. All right. We have our emphasis right here and here, a little bit, you know, kind of spattering here and there. But what our foreground's going to do is it'll add additional depth into the scene, but will also kind of bring our viewer's attention kind of more in this area again by the use of some darker foreground imagery, okay? So we'll take our reeds and nice light, even pressure. I'm kind of pressing down at the bottom, not squeezing the top. Okay, see that? watch this right here, what I do with this one. Okay, see this right here? I kind of left a little bit of an opening right here. So this kind of frames off this little area, but I've left this little opening right here, and I think that kind of also emphasizes this kind of area within this given space. It makes it stand out a little bit more by stamping something in front of it, you know. So it's not covering up, but it's bringing emphasis to that area. If you want to, you can bring in kind of a smaller element of it. I think I need to get more versifying colors. Someone on the Facebook group, I asked him, what color is that blue that they used in their scene? It was some kind of blue that looks really fantastic. Okay, so look at this foreground here. Down here, see there's some nice kind of framing going on, but I've left that opening here. So see that? By putting some darker next to something very light, it makes the area that's light seem even lighter by contrast. And I kind of have it kind of pointing in that direction right there, so it kind of really brings the attention to that cabin. We have our light source up there, so with our sun. Okay. All right. What's a stage? A blank stage without our main players. These are our hikers, male, female. And let's put them right over here. I don't know, maybe they're walking away from the cabin, who knows? Maybe they're setting out for the day. Yeah, maybe that's what it is. On their nice little walk. Now it really kind of stands out even more so by having, you know, people within that given space. Okay. Now I didn't do this on my previous video, but let's do this a little bit here. I'm taking a little bit more time. I just wanted to touch on kind of the basics of this dynamic here between light source and reflected light on my previous video, but let's take a little bit more time with some details of this one. So Q-tip and some white pigment ink, okay? Really blot off, okay? Now if we've retained that light area up there, the white of the paper, okay? And it should be easy to go in here without it looking too blotchy, because it already is fairly light. But really take off a lot of ink, and we can add kind of a little textural contrast within here by adding kind of a soft addition of this type, color, or white over the top of this sun. It kind of diffuses it a little bit in there. It's hard to see because it is so light. It's kind of putting light on light. Alright? But it kind of glows a little bit more. Okay, so we do something like that. Let me see if you can see the difference here, if I can kind of show it on camera. Alright. Okay. So that blue over there is the same blue that's underneath here, but now I've put that white pigment ink over it. The white pigment ink is kind of translucent, so you can't see underneath there as much, right? But that blue is the same as that one. So it looks lighter, and thus, like it's glowing a little bit more. There's kind of a softer feel to it, okay? And you can do that in your lighter areas within your clouds, and this is one of those reasons why we also left them lighter in some areas, okay, and we just didn't tone them all out, is we can add a little bit of this texture on there, and it looks a little bit more soft and billowy, and kind of makes them lighter. I don't want them real light, but I do want them to have a little bit of a kind of a personality emphasis. What I mean by personality is, you know, clouds are soft and billowy, so kind of adding this translucent layer in the lightest areas over the top of that really emphasizes that idea of softness, because they're kind of glowing. They're really not. It just kind of, it's softer looking, you know. I say it's not glowing because it's just reflected light on there, but it's what it represents and what it looks a little bit closer to. It looks a little bit more like a source of light and the reflected light when you put this kind of glow around something or on top of something. Like, for example, let's do it here in these trees. Like, on the sides of some of these tree branches, kind of facing my light, I can kind of lighten them up a little bit, and it might look like light is kind of reflecting off of those tree limbs on the side of the tree. That's kind of more facing the light than on the, you know, the right side of them. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so see, it's a little bit more glowing, and seeing these treetops right here, I just put a few taps of that ink over the top. It's a very dry application. 100% of the people that will ever do this, when you're starting off fresh, okay, and doing it for the first time, you're going to put way too much ink down because you didn't take enough off of here. Then sometimes when people start tapping, it's like, oh, I can't see anything. So they slap it, and then boom, they get another big area of a blob of ink. If you do, you just kind of wipe it off, or you tap it off with your finger, and it comes right off, so don't worry about that. But that's always what happens. They just use way too much ink on there. And it, you know, this is like 20 taps in a given area for it to kind of show. And when that happens, you have a lot of control over it. Okay, so let's see here. That sky is missing a little something to me, all right? And I think it could use an extra little touch of something. Let me go grab it right here, okay? There's a lot of similarity up there in that space. Okay. I just grabbed oak branch here. Similarity is not the word. It's too much monotony. This is basically looking the same from right here to right here, right? Okay. Now, if this was just all pine forest, I probably wouldn't use this. I mean, you could, and it would still look fine, but I don't know. I see these kind of more deciduous trees in here, and you know, it would kind of match. Thematically, this branch here. This branch here you can use as a bush or whatever. It could be coming up from below here, you know, if I didn't want to use that. The reed stamp, or I wanted to use it in conjunction with... Oops, this is my memories pad. I'm looking for my VersaFine. I forgot I had the memories one. Yeah, I was going to say the memories sometimes is really, really dark. And that's what I used to use for my foregrounds, but until I found this VersaFine one for my foreground usage, the dye-based blacks were always my kind of go-to foregrounds. But now, if I'm not in a rush, I'm not going to use the VersaFine like if I'm demonstrating at a convention, because, you know, I give those cards away there, and, you know, someone's going to smear it just because it takes so long to dry. Sometimes it takes a few days here. So, anyways, okay, so adding some of this in like so. Okay, so I'm add it here, and I'll add a little bit over here. But I don't want it to go like that because I'll get rid of my sun. So why don't I just go with a little bit of a piece of the oak branch. You can use different areas of it for what you want. Hopefully doing this too, it kind of frames things off a little bit more and might bring extra emphasis to that sun. Why don't we do that? Okay, so I'll go like this here. Like that. Okay, one more. A very small bit of it, okay? Alright, so kind of capped off the top. But putting that kind of darker thing around there makes that stand out a little bit lighter by contrast, okay? Oh, I don't know. I could take some of those clouds and kind of de-emphasize them a little bit to really push this idea of the cast or light source and reflected light dynamic, but I kind of like what's going on in those clouds right there. So I think there's enough of a, you know, that lighting reference going on in here to not have to kind of de-emphasize something. Okay, so what we have here is we have our light source, okay? And, I don't know, to you, your eye, is there enough emphasis on that cabin and path down there? Hopefully there is, in terms of what is being emphasized in this scene through the use of, you know, a lighter area, just not going in and toning everything in there. Imagine this is a lakeside type of scene too. You can make all water right over here and put a little whatever, kayak or something like that, or fish jumping out of the water, and just have some kind of, you know, light source over here and illuminate it down here. One of the things I think is kind of interesting in kind of these dynamics of that kind of diagonal lighting structure within a scene is, you know, from edge to edge like that, these diagonals, it's the longest point within a, you know, whatever square or rectangular space, right? And one of the things that happens when, you know, someone's looking at your piece, there's a certain visual path that people take, okay? In this case, I'm guessing that when they look at this, their eye is going to go straight to these little hikers down here. Wildlife, people, structures like that, that tends to be the focal point of a scene. People will zoom right into those places, you know, unless they're in like a totally shaded area or something like that, you know, where it's not a very apparent at first, but people usually go to, I don't know, reference points like that. So putting these down here and putting them up there, you know, the light source, I think that the visual path is to start right here and to kind of go over here. And then they kind of bounce around throughout here, you know, for the viewer's visual journey. But the kind of the initial path they'll take is here to here, and that's a longer point than from here to here, or something like that, if there was a sun up here, or something like that. So I think we've elongated and we've kind of maximized, I don't know, kind of a visual ride that you're taking people on. And then if I put some additional little touches in here in terms of details, which I'll do later on in a different video, it gives people something else to do so they can kind of wander and explore different little areas within here. Highlights on some clouds, wildflowers down here in the fields, whatever. There could be some, you know, some smoke or something like that coming out of the chimney right there, you know. And all those little things kind of add up to kind of a richer overall piece. Here's some pens right here. I can kind of darken in some areas underneath here, kind of in a more detailed manner. But all those little things kind of add up, and, you know, the recipient or viewer of your card is treated to a little bit more and more depending on kind of what you arranged for them. So, diagonals, and plus, sometimes if we stamp things at a diagonal too, you can do whole compositions that are slightly skewed. It adds that little bit of a kind of a visual movement to a scene and drama. In this case, everything looks kind of mellow in here, but when you put that over there on the corner and this down here, you've added that kind of visual slant while having the composition rather, you know, stamped rather conventionally, you know, vertically, you know, up and down or something like that. My cabin's not skewed and the whole hillside's not tilted or something like that. But you can add in that dynamic kind of structuring, subtle in this case in terms of light and reflected light, but nevertheless it's in there in terms of that, again, that visual path that you take your viewer on. So anyways, if you've stamped along with me, I hope you enjoyed it and had fun, and I don't know, if you're not working in kind of these elongated formats, hope you had fun with that one. It's kind of fun to do half-page scenes a lot of times just for the things that you're able to emphasize a little bit more, or in this case, you know, emphasize this really specific dynamic. But even if you like certain things, like I like texture and whatnot, I can do a little bit more of it up here in my clouds because there's simply more space in here, and I love creating lighting through these shadows, so having kind of a longer format here gave me some additional kind of excuses to add that shading here and there and to oscillate that use of lights and darks throughout the piece. So, and plus, I don't know, it's kind of more along the spirit of like a, and in this case, the elongated half-page format, it's more like a, kind of like a movie screen or something like that, where you have a lot more opportunities from your edge to edge of the screen. So, okay, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, drop us a note. And if you like this video, maybe you might, whatever, share, like, and subscribe. Okay, until the next scene. And maybe one more of these diagonal lighting scenes, lessons to do. And we'll do it again in a stamp along.